Nobody in Clover Ridge, Tennessee, locked their doors at night. Nobody, that is, except Grandpa Ned. Old Ned Calloway had spent 31 years as a county sheriff before his knees gave out, and his doctor gave him a choice: retire or be carried out in a box. He'd chosen to retire barely. Now at 72, he sat most evenings in a rocker on his porch, watching the fireflies blink above the soybean fields, a glass of sweet tea sweating in his weathered hand. His silver hair had thinned to almost nothing. His blue eyes, though, were sharp as fishhooks. He missed nothing. He was the one who first said something was wrong about my wife, Linda. "That woman watches you the way a cat watches a mouse hole," Ned told me once, spitting tobacco juice off the porch railing, like she's waiting for something. I'd laughed it off. I loved Linda. I'd married her 3 years ago in a small ceremony in this very county, 2 months after I'd moved from Chicago to take over my late father's hardware store. She was beautiful, clever, and patient. God, was she patient, especially with my daughter, Mara. Mara was 8 years old and had been diagnosed as profoundly deaf since birth. She communicated through sign language and written notes, her expression always quiet and watchful, her dark eyes absorbing everything in a room like a camera. She adored Grandpa Ned. Every Sunday, she'd sit beside his rocker while he'd sign clumsy, half-remembered ASL. He'd taken a community class at the library just for her. She'd correct him with the ghost of a smile, and he'd slap his knee and shake his head like she'd told the funniest joke. Mara never warmed to Linda, not once, not ever. I told myself it was grief. Mara's mother, my first wife, Claire, had died of a brain aneurysm when Mara was 4. Children process loss in strange ways, but Linda tried. She cooked Mara's favorite meals, bought her books, sat beside her during thunderstorms. Mara would accept these gestures with a polite nod and then quietly move away, like she was putting distance between herself and something she didn't trust. I should have listened to my daughter. 8-year-olds don't lie with their bodies. The night it all came apart began like any other Thursday. Linda announced she was driving into town to pick up a prescription and some groceries. She kissed me on the cheek, lips dry, quick, businesslike, the way you kiss a surface and not a person, and she was gone. The taillights of her SUV disappeared around the bend at the end of our gravel driveway. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink, looking out at the dark tree line behind the house. Something felt off, a faint electrical unease I couldn't name, the way the air changes before lightning strikes. That's when I heard it. A voice. Soft, hoarse, barely above a whisper, like a sound produced by someone who'd never learned how to make one because she hadn't, not once in 8 years. "Dad." I spun around so fast I knocked the glass into the sink. It shattered. I didn't care. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was looking at me with those enormous, steady eyes, and her lips were pressed together tight, like she'd surprised herself too. "Mara," my voice broke. I couldn't breathe. She swallowed, tried again. The word came out cracked and effortful, like she was lifting something terribly heavy. "Dad, I can hear." A pause. She pressed her fist to her chest against her heart. "I can hear for a long time now." The room tilted. I grabbed the counter. "What?" "They're planning to kill you." She said it fast, flat, with the affectless clarity of someone who has spent their entire life filtering out noise and listening only to meaning. Linda and the man, I heard them many times. My daughter had been hearing for how long? Months, years, and she had kept it hidden, this impossible secret, this quiet superpower. Why? I would ask her why later, much later. Right now I was trying to process the second sentence. "They're planning to kill you." "What man?" I managed. She moved to the kitchen table, picked up the notepad we kept there for her, and wrote a name. She slid it across to me. "Derek Holt." My business partner, the man I'd trusted to co-manage the hardware store while I handled the books and the buying. The man who'd always seemed so easy, so affable, always cracking jokes, always the first to offer a handshake. The man, I now recalled with sickening clarity, who had started dating Linda before I arrived in Clover Ridge. They'd broken up before Linda and I met, or so she'd told me, or so I'd believed. My hands were shaking. Mara, how much did you hear? How often? She took the notepad back and wrote quickly, they talk when they think I'm asleep. I hear through the vent in my floor, they said tonight, when Linda is gone, someone is coming to the house. My blood ran cold. Someone is coming to the house. I grabbed my phone. My first instinct was to call 911. My second, faster instinct was to call Grandpa Ned. He picked up on the first ring, the way retired sheriffs always do, like some part of them never truly stops being on duty. Ned, I said, voice barely under control. I need you, right now, don't use your truck, lights off, come through the field. A pause, then, with the calm of a man who had talked down armed men and pulled bodies from rivers, already putting on my boots. I hung up and looked at my daughter, my extraordinary, brave, impossible daughter, who was watching me with those ancient, patient eyes. You kept this secret to protect me, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded once. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and folded her into my arms and held on with everything I had. She was rigid at first. 8 years of silence makes for a guarded body, and then slowly, she pressed her face against my shoulder and held on too. We're going to be okay, I told her. I promise you. She didn't answer, but I felt her nod. Ned arrived in 11 minutes, which, given that he was 72 and crossing a dark soybean field in the pitch black, was nothing short of remarkable. He came through the back door without knocking, carrying the .38 revolver he'd worn on duty for 31 years, and he took one look at my face and Mara's and asked no questions. He was, in that moment, a sheriff again, completely and without hesitation. Tell me, he said. I told him. When I finished, he sat quietly for 5 seconds. Ned always sat quietly before he acted. He said it was the difference between sheriffs and corpses, and then he pulled out his phone and called a man named Calvin Trout, a deputy he'd mentored 20 years ago who was now the county's chief of investigations. Calvin, Ned said, I need you to run a quiet check on a man named Derek Holt, and I need you to put a car on the Callaway hardware store property tonight. Don't call anyone else. Don't make noise, another pause, because I said so, that's why. He hung up, looked at Mara. He raised his hands and signed, slowly, deliberately, You are the bravest person I know. Mara looked at his hands, then she signed back something I didn't catch. Her fingers moved too fast, and Ned let out a short, startled laugh, the laugh of a man who hadn't expected to be surprised. What did she say? I asked. He shook his head, still smiling. She said, I know, I've been waiting for the right moment. The man they sent arrived at 10:30, a blunt-faced stranger in a rental car who had the bad luck of pulling up a driveway where a retired sheriff was waiting in the dark with 31 years of experience and a very well-maintained revolver. Deputies arrived 6 minutes later. Linda was pulled over on Route 9 before midnight, her phone full of messages that told a story both older and uglier than any of us had imagined. A life insurance policy on my name, taken out 8 months earlier, large enough to make greed legible. Derek Holt was arrested at his apartment at 12:47 a.m. Mara's hearing, it turned out, had returned gradually over the course of 2 years, the result of a slow, spontaneous recovery in her right ear, something extraordinarily rare and not fully understood. Her specialist, when we finally brought her in, was nearly speechless. She had adapted, he said, with a resourcefulness that he'd never witnessed in a patient. She'd had her reasons for staying quiet. She would tell me them, piece by piece, over the years that followed, how she'd been afraid no one would believe her, how she'd needed to gather certainty before she acted, how she'd waited for exactly the right moment. But mostly, she told me, she'd wanted to be the one to save me herself. Grandpa Ned is 75 now. He comes to dinner every Sunday without fail. He and Mara sit together on the porch after dessert, and sometimes she speaks to him. Her voice still has the careful, deliberate quality of someone who takes words seriously, and sometimes they just sit in the quiet together, watching the fireflies blink above the soybean fields. Some silences, I've learned, are full of more love than any sound.